Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I have a story that will chill you to the bone. Imagine being alone on a train late at night only to realize you're not really alone. This is the terrifying tale of the ghostly passenger, my ride with a phantom on the midnight train. Strap in, because this one will make you think twice before taking that last train home. Before we begin, be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. It was a cold, dreary night, the kind where the chill seems to seep into your bones no matter how tightly you wrap your coat around you. I had missed the last regular train home after a late night at work, and my only option was the midnight train. The station was nearly deserted, save for a few late-night stragglers like myself. The platform was dimly lit, the lamps casting long, flickering shadows that danced eerily across the cracked pavement. I remember feeling uneasy as I stood there, my breath visible in the freezing air. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional distant howl of the wind. Something about the station felt off that night, like it was suspended in time, disconnected from the world I knew. As I waited, a sense of dread began to creep in, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The train finally pulled into the station with a shrill screech, its headlights piercing through the darkness like the eyes of some monstrous beast. The doors slid open with a groan, and I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, my instinct screaming at me to turn back. But it was late, and I was tired. I just wanted to get home. The train was nearly empty, the only other passengers being a few people scattered throughout the carriages. I found a seat near the back, hoping to rest my eyes for the long ride ahead. The interior of the train was dimly lit, with the overhead lights flickering intermittently, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to twist and shift with every movement of the train. As the train lurched forward, I noticed an odd smell in the air, stale and musty, like the scent of something old and forgotten. It wasn't unusual for trains to have a certain mustiness, but this was different, more pungent, almost suffocating. I tried to ignore it, but it clung to the back of my throat, making me feel uneasy. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the track should have been soothing, but instead, it only heightened my sense of unease. The windows were streaked with grime, making it difficult to see outside, but I could make out the vague shapes of trees rushing past in the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that I was being watched. As the train sped through the night, I started to doze off, my exhaustion finally catching up with me. But just as I was drifting into a light sleep, I felt a sudden icy chill wash over me, as though the temperature had plummeted in an instant. I sat up, startled, my breath fogging in the air as I looked around the carriage. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the carriage, a figure was sitting in one of the seats. He hadn't been there when I boarded, and I was certain I was alone in this part of the train. The figure was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd see in photographs from the early 1900s. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but what little I could see made my blood run cold. His skin was deathly pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, those hollow, sunken eyes, seemed to glow with a faint, eerie light. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, as if unaware of my presence, but I could feel his gaze on me, even though he wasn't looking directly at me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Who is that?" I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the sound of the train. I couldn't look away from him, drawn to his unsettling presence like a moth to a flame. The air around him seemed to ripple, distorting like a mirage, and I could feel the temperature drop even further the longer I stared. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible, but I was frozen in place, trapped by my own fear. The figure slowly turned his head towards me, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette on strings. When his eyes finally locked onto mine, I felt a wave of pure terror crash over me. His eyes were empty, void of life, but they held a depth of sorrow and malevolence that chilled me to my core. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, a low, guttural growl emanated from deep within his chest, reverberating through the carriage. It was a sound that made my stomach churn and my skin crawl, a sound that spoke of pain and suffering beyond comprehension. What do you want?" I stammered, my voice trembling with fear. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he began to slowly rise from his seat, his movements disjointed and unnatural. As he stood, I noticed something else. His legs weren't quite touching the floor. He was hovering just above it, his body swaying slightly, as if caught in a slow, spectral current. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in this carriage with something not of this world, something that had no business being here. The train's interior seemed to darken around him, the shadows growing longer and deeper, swallowing the weak light of the flickering bulbs. I could feel the walls closing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. The train began to pick up speed, the clattering of the wheels on the tracks growing louder and more frantic, as if the train itself was trying to escape something. The figure began to move towards me, gliding more than walking, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me feel as though my soul was being laid bare. As he approached, the cold intensified, seeping into my bones, freezing me in place. The closer he got, the more I could feel an overwhelming sense of despair and anguish radiating from him. It was as if all the sorrow in the world had been condensed into this one spectral being, and he was dragging it behind him like a cloak of misery. I tried to stand, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. My legs were like lead, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, a frantic, terrified rhythm that matched the accelerating clatter of the train. I was completely and utterly at the mercy of whatever this thing was. He was only a few feet away now, his hollow eyes boring into mine, and I could see his face more clearly. His skin was cracked and dry like old parchment, and his mouth hung open in a silent scream of eternal torment. His clothes were tattered and stained, hanging off his emaciated frame like rags, and that smell, the pungent decaying odour, grew stronger with each passing second. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the figure stopped, his face inches from mine. I could feel his icy breath on my skin, and my vision began to blur as the temperature dropped even further. I was on the brink of collapse, the fear and cold sapping the last of my strength. Then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, he spoke. His words were distorted, as if they were coming from a great distance, but I could understand them clearly. Phantom, distorted, echoing voice. "This train, it is my prison. I am bound to it, condemned to ride these tracks for eternity. You have seen me, and now you must share my curse." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped on this cursed train with this vengeful spirit, doomed to suffer the same fate as him. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. I was powerless against the spectral force that stood before me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. The despair was overwhelming, crushing me under its weight. I felt tears sting my eyes, a mixture of fear and hopelessness, as I stared into the hollow eyes of the phantom. Just when I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, the train began to slow down. The screech of the brakes was deafening, and the carriage jolted violently as the train came to an abrupt stop. The sudden movement broke the spell that had held me in place, and I stumbled back, gasping for air. The phantom recoiled slightly, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. I could see him struggling to maintain his shape, his edges blurring and shifting as if he was being pulled back by some unseen force. The oppressive cold began to lift, and I could feel warmth slowly returning to my body. But the danger wasn't over. The phantom's eyes blazed with fury, and he let out a guttural scream that reverberated through the entire carriage. The windows shattered and the lights flickered wildly, plunging the train into chaos. The air was filled with the sound of 1,000 voices, whispering, chanting, pleading, all overlapping in a cacophony of despair. Desperate, I turned and ran towards the nearest door, my mind a whirlwind of panic and fear. I had no idea where the train had stopped, or if I could even escape, but I knew I had to try. The phantom's presence loomed behind me, his icy breath brushing the back of my neck as I fumbled with the door handle. Come on, open," I shouted, my voice shaking with terror. Finally, the door slid open with a groan, and I threw myself out onto the platform. I hit the ground hard, the impact jolting through my body, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I put as much distance as I could between myself and that cursed train. I didn't stop running until I was far away from the station, my legs burning and my lungs screaming for air. When I finally dared to look back, the train was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. The station was dark and silent, abandoned. I collapsed onto the ground, tears streaming down my face as the adrenaline finally began to wear off. I was alive, but at what cost? The memory of that phantom, his hollow eyes and his words were burned into my mind, a haunting reminder of the terror I had just escaped. But deep down I knew it wasn't over. The phantom's curse still lingered in the air like a dark cloud hanging over me. I could still feel his presence, watching, waiting, and I knew I would never be truly free. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, sweet dreams.